I'm Dipa. I work for LCP. Many of you probably know me for a number of years. I work with HR professionals specifically around employee benefits. So over the last decade or so, we've seen the realms of HR's decision-making change from being focused on benefits, but also looking at pensions, and more recently, education around it. Whilst often, and I think Kenny picked up on this as well, having to justify the value and spend to people like your Aggreko and your MCO. So earlier this year, LCP did some research. We interviewed 100 HR, pension and benefit decision makers. There's lots of research churned out year on year about what's the next benefit to include, what's the next best technology. However, we really wanted to understand what's the drivers for change within organizations, but more importantly, the blockers for change. And I'm not going to go through all the research that we went through today because I'd love for Fraser to share some of the challenges they've come across. But I just want to share some key highlights which are relevant today because we've talked a lot about technology, data, and solutions. I mean, the full research can be found in the lovely little blue booklets with the front cover like that at the back of the room. But really, I think now's the time for HR professionals and to some degree our industry as well, to really stop and think and reevaluate what's relevant for an organization and their culture, as opposed to getting stuck in all these wonderful solutions that are out there. Hopefully our clicker will work. So I'll just go through some highlights and then hand over to Fraser and we'll take questions at the end. So it's just some key themes that came out. Inevitably, pensions and savings options are having a knock-on effect on benefits. What does that actually mean? Well, our telephone research has actually found it has an impact both from a budgeting perspective, but also from a delivery perspective. This is a real problem for HR because there's no longer just a pensions budget, it's a benefit and reward budget. So those are things that we need to be mindful of when we're looking at change in this area. Many of the organizations we spoke to are exploring technology. They told us it's the smartest way to deliver flexibility and choice for a varied demographic, whilst at the same time not increasing your HR operational costs of managing multiple benefits and pensions. However, those that have had technology for a number of years, so I've worked in Flex for the last 10 God knows how many years, told us, look, we're really worried about the user experience. Our employees' journey through their benefits and pensions is really disjointed. Our providers don't want to talk to each other. The insurance provider doesn't want to integrate with our Flex platform and so forth. And these are the things that our decision makers have told us is a real challenge. And they're really looking for this magic solution which brings together all the best of breed solutions that they've already got in place to really enhance the employee experience so employees can make the right choices at the right time at various stages of their lifestyle. Oh, this is a build slide. Forgot about that one. So when we asked further about the technology aspect, we wanted to really understand, and our questions were shaped by a pilot group, so we didn't drive the information in. So we said, right, you're looking at technology, but what aspects are you really focusing on? And HR were keen that benefits and pensions were made available through mobile and tablet applications. Why? Because the workplace is now becoming a fluid concept. We no longer work in offices. We're all over the place. I mean, Fraser's decision makers are based all over the world. So, you know, that's really important that benefits, pensions, and reward are accessible to our employees whilst they're on the move. So that was a key theme. A second theme that came through is that employers want to make available more analytical modeling tools where employees can make informed decisions based on their individual circumstances. So not just looking at their benefits and their pensions that the employer provides, but also input information about other income streams or debts and so forth that they've got in place to make the right choices for them at the right time. And of course, to support all of that, we were told that HR are keen for more interactive online use of communication. So not those lovely interactive PDFs or website pages that we come across, things like live chat, where you post a question and someone answers instantly. So these are key areas that HR are keen to focus on. However, they did tell us there's restrictions within the market because not many solutions exist out there from an employees and employer perspective. Just the last slide before I hand over to Fraser. So we said this is all great stuff, but from a top level, because a lot of HR people are now sitting on the board. 10 years ago, like Kenny said, they were a nice to have and were involved on the outskirts, but actually now we're seeing more and more HR directors sitting on the board. And what we were told is that HR are keen that benefits in the future are measurable. So what are the real return on investment stats that are relevant for our business? Future-proofed, so not just a solution that's in place for the next 3 to 5 years, but something that adapts and grows as our business grows. And thirdly, aligned to the business strategy. A lot of the time when we're working with organizations, their benefit and pension spend tends to be on a part of their workforce which actually isn't a part of the business that they want to grow anymore. So when you're looking at your benefits and pension spend, is it in the right place and is it aligned to where the business wants to grow? However, when HR are looking to change the current state of play when it comes to benefits and pensions, we were told about some obstacles that they often come across, are often overlooked or mismanaged, and that was resource. So HR come across a wonderful project that they want to implement, but actually, because it's more technology-focused, they need some input from IT. Engagement, stakeholders continually getting buy-in from them and having to sell what you're trying to do, which is right for the organization. And budget. I think earlier on, our colleagues from Experian mentioned that, we spend a fortune on our customers, but we forget that our employees are our customers. They go out, they go to restaurant, bars, talk about you and your brand as an employer, but actually we're not spending that time or money on developing the employer brand. I'm now going to hand over to Fraser, who's going to go through some of the challenges we've come across when trying to bring Aggreko's benefit and reward offering into sort of a more structure that fits in with the business where it wants to be in the future and more aligned to the employee needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fraser Low. I'm the rewards manager at Aggreko PLC. Aggreko, for those of you who don't know, we deal in power generation and temperature control solutions for our global clients. I joined Aggreko in February this year, and prior to that spent 8 years in the oil and gas sector, based in the oil capital of Europe, which sounds glamorous. Sadly, it means Aberdeen in Scotland. So, since joining Aggreko, I've been working with Dipa and the team at LCP in a couple of high-profile projects, one of which, as Dipa's mentioned, is looking at a flexible benefits platform to implement for our UK business currently. This is early stages on that, so I would appreciate it's not been launched to the business. So if anyone is tweeting, it's not gone live. So just if we could keep that within the room today. Don't want to spoil a surprise before Christmas. So, as I'm sure several of you can relate to, one of the main difficulties being brought into a business to manage reward change is not knowing who your stakeholders are when you first come in. And certainly that's something I've experienced since joining in February. And this project itself was it was an idea, and I've been picking up the strands from there, and then obviously trying to run with it and get ourselves to this point. I think when I was approached, certainly, to join the business, the due diligence process is one that's key, and certainly making sure that you have your stakeholder buy-in is one of the key issues that we as HR professionals experience, and certainly that's the topic that I'm going to cover off today. So I am sure I am preaching to the converted when I say that reward can be quite an emotive topic when you're speaking to internal stakeholders. Without fail, you'll find that some who are key will be more involved than others and extremely keen to support you. And I suppose my only word of warning with that is that some people obviously do want to influence whatever you're trying to implement for their own personal gain, but at the end of the day, 90% of the time the stakeholders out there are there to provide you the support that you need and have the best intentions. So, slide we've got here, I think some of these points are pretty self-explanatory, but I certainly find that it's a real good key barometer when it comes to managing reward projects. If we start top left, understanding who your stakeholders are. Now, they can vary completely and utterly, so from single business leaders, groups of cross-functional leaders, or entire teams that need to be involved at various stages of the project. It's also worth not only identifying them, though, but ensuring that you identify them into the two separate camps, and that's those who, through the process, will be extremely positive through the process, because, let's say, as a manager, their teams and employees have been campaigning for the change that you're implementing, and then laterally, those who potentially could be negatively affected by the change, and I use the example of the IT function, whereby as reward professionals, we're bringing this to the table. Ultimately, we're asking for their involvement and them to commit resource to. So there's obviously varying levels of identifying who your key stakeholders are. Always remember that whilst stakeholder input is the key to the success of this, it doesn't automatically mean that it's top priority for everyone. So I think that's something I've found through years of working in HR, that whilst you identify your key stakeholders, ultimately, you need their buy-in, and depending on how their priorities sit, it's not always their top priority. But this leads us nicely into the second point, which is recognizing and building the bridges and influencing those stakeholders that are key for yourself. I certainly find you will be the specialist and the expert in your field and taking something forward to engaging with your stakeholders and getting buy-in, but you have to make sure that you've got that credibility when you're engaging with them. And I always find building a good rapport at the earliest opportunity, not necessarily at the stage when you need to engage them. Ultimately, when it comes to that point, the door will be open, and you won't be that person who they don't pick up the phone to. So thirdly, be aware that new stakeholders will become key further down the line. Always keeping an eye on the horizon is one that's key, and I think Dipa and I were laughing about this earlier. Through the project that we've been working on, I landed the joys of having two relatively key new stakeholders coming in partway through, none other than a new global HR director and my new boss, a global reward director. So this project was commissioned, we were working through it, and suddenly a complete curveball came in, two new individuals, and literally I was left taking myself back to stage one, understanding, obviously identifying that these guys were key to the delivery of this project, building up the credibility again, ensuring that they got buy-in, and ultimately trust me as a reward individual who was going to be leading this high-profile project for them. Laterally then, so in terms of the last point here, last point here, so keeping it high level and making sure that you pitch to the right level in terms of who your audience is. So there's times when you can go in, best laid plans, you're speaking to your CFO, for example, always have a plan B, make sure you can revert to short and sharp if needs be. That's something that I've found absolutely key, and it's caught me out on far too many occasions. Planning the sessions is always very, very important. There's different working styles for all different types of stakeholders, but again, planning will make sure that that's set. And I think the last point here on this fourth point down here, so reward projects are complicated. There's no getting away from it when it comes to engaging people in the business, so ensure that the technical aspects are pitched at the right level. To give you an example, Dipa and I spent a couple of days up in Glasgow engaging some of my HR colleagues, and we were trying to work out what level of engagement do we need to ensure we pitch with them, because ultimately there was going to be change needed within the HR function, and we had to make sure that we engaged. So what we took the decision was making sure, focusing in on how good is this going to be. This is going to be a real change for the business. Ultimately, it's going to make your life a lot simpler, and the exciting elements of the project itself. By the end of that session, because we'd structured it nicely and pitched at the right level, we left with a group of champions. And that's something that, again, you can sell it as much as you want yourself, but ultimately you need stakeholders within the business to obviously buy into it and sell it to the rest of the business. Change no matter how beneficial to employees, is invariably greeted with resistance. There's no getting away from that, and I think certainly when it comes to technology, that just adds to the complexities and makes it so much more difficult. Through this project that we've been working on, I've seen resistance from HR stakeholders, from line managers, from senior management, often highlighting the disruption that this could bring to their business, that may bring them. There's nothing tangible, but it's always the level of concern. So it's just trying to appease that concern and obviously following up with the likes of the survey data that Dipa's got, something tangible that you can pin what you're proposing and why you're doing it. As touched on already, I think forming groups of champions within the business, that doesn't always have to just be, as I alluded to, the internal group of HR peers, but if you've got employee forums, again, I found reaching out to them, engaging with them, explaining what you're doing, ultimately they're going to be taking what you're delivering to the business and making your implementation so much simpler. Throughout the process, I continually draw stakeholders back to their original remit. Why are we doing this? And certainly in this case, it's to improve our employee value proposition. Always bringing them back to that, no matter how painful things appear, certainly seems to appease and certainly help gain the buy-in from stakeholders. Final point I want to make, I think, is the key to success is keeping the faith through the process. We've found that through this, that there's been times when we're thinking, is this actually going to get to fruition? But absolutely, keep the faith. You'll invariably come across stakeholders who do resist the change that you're proposing, but I've certainly found adopting a style that is can-do and solution-based ultimately gets us to the point where you get full buy-in from your stakeholders and get the buy-in to implement what you're trying to.
Thank you, Fraser. So just to wrap up our session, I guess looking at today's speakers and the agenda that we've had for the day and key messages from what Fraser's just been through, but also from our own research, I think there's three key things we need to take away from today. Technology, it's coming our way, whether you like it or not, driven by external factors like your employees and providers. They want to do things efficiently and deliver education in a different way. And of course, it seems the most logical way to offer all this choice and flexibility whilst at the same time delivering education in a more sort of targeted way. But to get the technology right, it's really important that you think about your business, your culture, and your stakeholders before you embark on any benefits change. And the third aspect is use your data. It amazes me between, and this is a typical example when we work with clients, the amount of data that payroll hold, but HR don't hold. If we all got together and put that data together, we would understand our employees and our demographic better. We would identify the gaps in the current offering and also what solutions are relevant for your organization. And also, it helps you shape your internal message. And Fraser and I have been through a journey at Aggreko for the last year or so, but we've tweaked our messages and our positioning depending on our audience, and that takes time. And when you're working with a solution provider, they need to take that time out for you. And I think in the session earlier on, there was a question up there about HR don't deal with data and we're not used to doing that sort of stuff. Use your advisors. That's what they're there to do. If they can't take a tranche of your data, identify trends, identify what's wrong with your benefits offering and where it needs to go in the future, they're not the right advisors for you. Or something's going wrong there. Clearly, you should not have to recruit a data specialist to do that for you. And I guess in terms of how and where do you start, there's lots of options, solutions, benefits, and pensions out there. Within this little diagram, we've encapsulated key areas which I think you can just take away and map out between you and your colleagues and get right before you embark on any benefit change, and really think about the relevance to your organization. And think about the technology that you've already got in place and how it can be expanded, or in some cases scaled back, because it's just costing you lots of money and not delivering the targeted messaging that you need for your people. And hopefully what this approach will deliver for you is firstly the business case for change, but also get engagement from your stakeholders because you've got the messaging right. But later, when this is all launched and delivered, a clear demonstration of the return on investment based on the outcomes that your organization expects. Thank you.
Thank you very much.